Hey, dude, over there, you, yeah, catch. Oh, shit. Fuck. Developmental coordination disorder, also known as dyspraxia, or its shortened anagram DCD, is a neurological condition in the same class as Parkinson's and cerebral palsy. It's just not as apparent. I guess this is somewhat of a coming out video to some extent. I've tried to hide it, and as anyone with dyspraxia will let you know, it's not the easiest thing. Dyspraxia actually begins in childhood and continues on into adulthood, which makes it really hard to hide. So, figured it's better to just get this out early while I'm in my 20s instead of waiting until I'm in my 30s or 40s and having everyone think I'm just that clumsy. And believe me, we are very clumsy as dyspraxics. And why does dyspraxia make me clumsy, and why am I holding a Copenhagen can right now? Well, I'm holding a Copenhagen can right now because I dip. But I'm also holding it to show the two basic things that dyspraxia does tend to affect. That is gross and fine motor control. See, what dyspraxia does is it affects the planning of movements. And so when your brain gives your body a signal, it basically holds that back and doesn't transmit that signal accurately. And so what you end up having is coordination issues. It does affect short-term memory, and as such, the long-term memory is enhanced. And so people with dyspraxia tend to have a really good long-term memory, but with short-term memory, they'll forget something they just did 5 minutes ago. Because the signals are so weak going from the brain to the arm, sensory overload and panic attacks, as well as anxiety, tend to be common in people with dyspraxia. So when they're looking at developmental issues in children and adults, usually they focus on two things: gross motor control and fine motor control. Gross motor control is things like balance, standing up, maintaining spatial awareness, proprioception, determining left from right. Just very simple things that envelop the use of balance and the whole body. And so people with dyspraxia also tend to be more prone to motion sicknesses like car sickness, seasickness, air sickness, and so on. Fine motor control, on the other hand, is things like actually writing, like basic finger movements, like doing that, which most people can do a lot faster. As you can see, I'm kind of having trouble with that. Our handwriting tends to be terrible. I was actually going to show a sample of my handwriting, but due to YouTube community guidelines, I can't show anything that graphic. Is a lot of people with dyspraxia tend to be very good at speech and at speaking. Now, there also is other forms of dyspraxia, like developmental verbal dyspraxia, and that's when you have trouble actually speaking, like sequencing sounds and putting words together. It tends to be a stutter, and language development tends to be halted as well. It's very hard to tell when someone has limitations, and so when someone's forgetting something all the time, or tripping over their feet, or if they're at work or in a scenario where they're expected to use hand-eye coordination or proper time management or proper balance, or mainly picking up objects and putting them down, things that involve muscle tone and just any sort of grasping or motor skills, they tend to be somewhat limited. Not to the level of being flat out useless, as some people like to say in the workforce, but more or less just slow. Limited, I guess, is the official scientific term they would use. So I've found that the best way to explain to someone without dyspraxia what dyspraxia truly is to just show off the basic things that most people take for granted, that I have to do either differently or to a limited extent, or in a half-assed way, so I'm capable of getting it done. Now, for this next half of the video, I'm going to be talking about my own limitations. I don't want anyone taking that as the end-all definition of dyspraxia. All cases of dyspraxia are different. Some people still have somewhat alright fine motor control, but they still have problem with gross motor control, and vice versa. And as I mentioned earlier, some people do have problems with speech along with or instead of the classic dyspraxia. And so my personal experiences do not cover the whole of what dyspraxia is. And so dyspraxia in the United States generally isn't that well understood. In the UK, it's actually a little better understood. There's actually a character in Doctor Who, I think the most recent Doctor, who has dyspraxia. Also, Daniel Radcliffe, the kid who played Harry Potter, of course, another person in the UK, has dyspraxia, and he has been open about it. But here in the United States, it's not as generally understood. So I've found that I've had to try to hide it as much as possible, especially being in the workforce, working in retail or working in warehouses. Coming up with a disability, people tend to treat you differently. And so I've found certain ways to get around some of my limitations without having to bring them up to a superior or have to require assistance. Because in a lot of these cases, and even with autism spectrum disorder, asking for help is one of the hardest things to do. But especially with dyspraxia, where sensory overload is very common, asking for help tends to bring on some extra anxiety. And so if you do have dyspraxia, and anything I say that I do in this video does help you, by all means take it. But also, don't be afraid to get help either. I've found that having support systems and close friends who you know aren't going to judge you, that you can confide in, may help. Now, dyspraxia also isn't a very physically showable thing. It's not one of those illnesses that people can tell right away. Most of the time, you're just seen as a little slow or a little clumsy. So, why do I smoke cigarettes? Do not smoke cigarettes if you have dyspraxia, just because you have dyspraxia and you saw it in this video. I do not condone the use of cigarettes by any stretch. I wish I had never started. But why do I smoke cigarettes specifically? Well, as stated earlier, I do have some gross motor and fine motor issues using my hands. And so the anxiety on top of that, I find that if I'm out in public, like say walking, I do have that anxiety of people are watching me, and I don't know what to do with my hands while people are watching me. I can't swing my arms like some people do when they walk. I don't have much of a swagger to my step, otherwise I would trip over my own feet because of dyspraxia. And so to try to occupy my hands, I'll smoke a cigarette while I'm walking. I'm going to smoke a cigarette now because I'm talking about myself, and my anxiety is ramped up through the roof right now. Another problem I tend to have is with writing. Handwriting is a big no-no for me, and I find that it's easier if you do have a computer at work and you have to write notes or whatever. It is better to use a keyboard and type out letters. Something as simple as that. Now, we live in the internet age. This probably seems like a no-brainer for anyone anyway. But I find that any sort of document that you would normally have to write, if you can type it, it's always best to just type. With dyspraxia, there are ways you can work through the limitations, but it takes a lot of focus and a lot of training. I myself play guitar, but it took me a long time to learn the guitar. It took me about 4 years to just be able to do basic chords. And so I find that if you are looking to be in a band, play guitar, play bass, whatever, try to focus on more of a simpler genre to start with. Something like punk, something that's death metal or slam metal, something that's all breakdowns and chords, and work your way from chords slowly. Try to focus more on the punk or metal style if you can, though, because the simpler chords are going to be a lot easier to move and switch shifts in. I do plan on doing a video later on rolling cigarettes, because I've found that rolling cigarettes is damn near difficult. There is a way to do it, and it's a cheap way, and it wastes a lot of tobacco. So I could show you that. I'll show you that in another video for another time if you guys are interested in that. But that's going to take way too much time for me to cover in just this video. Driving. Driving is one of the hardest things to do. If you live in a place with good public transport, by all means, take the bus. It's just a general good idea in general if you live in a place with good public transport. Now, a lot of people with dyspraxia do drive. Driving isn't entirely difficult. It just means taking a lot of focus. You shouldn't be texting while driving anyway, but doubly so if you have dyspraxia. Now, for those of you that have trouble walking, whether it be balance, gait, so on, I was actually in the Army for a little bit before I injured my knee. And that's one thing to remember with dyspraxia is if you're going to join the Army, make sure that you go to some sort of training, whether it be ROTC or even just going to a gym and working out a little bit ahead of time. So that way you're ready to be walking with a heavy load on your back, because that is what did me in. And well, now I'm not a soldier anymore. But I'll talk about that story later too. Anyway, in the Army, I learned a whole bunch of marching cadences. And if you go on YouTube and you search up U.S. Army Airborne marching cadences, you'll find a whole bunch of them. And I find when I'm walking, whether it be walking to work or just going for a regular walk, I'll listen to these cadences. I'll plug my headphones in. The key thing to remember is when you lift up with your left foot, count 2, 3, 4, as quick as that. Left, 2, 3, 4. Step with every number you hit. And you'll find that your walking is a lot more organized. Now, if you have headphones in and you're listening to this Army beat, no one's going to notice that you're counting, and if you're counting to yourself. Now, like many people with dyspraxia, I do have my fair share of troubles in the workplace, usually with going to do things and then totally forgetting about it. I'm sure everyone watching this video has walked into a room at some point and then just totally forgot why they walked into that room. People with dyspraxia get that all the damn time. It's not just with walking into a new room, it's with just doing a new task in general. Every time your brain tells your hand or your body to do a task, it's immediately forgetting the last thing that you told it to do. That's why I take my time when I'm talking too. You'll notice I tend to skip ahead or ramble when I talk, and well, editing helps a lot with that. But you can't edit in real life. Best thing to do is to take a public speaking course and just get a good idea of tone and speech and timing. That's the biggest thing, is timing of your wording. And also learning how to talk with your hands. When and how often to talk with your hands is also important. What you're doing with your hands. And so if you practice this every day in the mirror, and this is something any vocal coach or any playwright or anyone who does anything in drama or acting will do, is they'll show you how you talk with your hands. And while most people just do it naturally, or do many of the things that we take for granted naturally, people with dyspraxia tend to have problems perceiving many things at once. It's that sensory overload. Another problem with dyspraxia is the lack of feeling, and almost like a sensory deprivation, but with the feeling more than the perceiving. While we can see pretty well for the most part, I mean, some people do have glasses, some people are born with blindness, even people with dyspraxia. But for the most part, dyspraxia doesn't tend to affect most of the perception of things, whether it be sight or sound or smell or taste, but more of the cognitive things like feeling and sensing. And so many of us, when we go and hop in the shower, won't realize the shower is too hot until, bam, now our skin is blistering on our back. And oh my God, it's so hot. Best thing to do with that is to actually start out taking a cold shower. And it sounds ridiculous. And oh my God, I hate cold showers. I understand. But start out taking a cold shower. You'll feel it as you slowly shift up. And as you shift up in temperature, take a minute to feel the water first. And then move it a little further. And then move it a little further. And then you'll find an ideal temperature without burning the hell out of yourself. Another thing is the balance and coordination and holding things that are full of liquid. Holding things that are full of water. I find that the best thing to do is to just do it one at a time. If you are going to work, go to work early. By all means, go to work early. You want to get a good idea of what you're going to be doing throughout the day, what your targets are, and if you can, write them down. The best thing about my workplace is we actually have a book that has all of the things for each shift listed that must be done. It's actually kind of helpful. And if you can get something like that at your work, even if you just say, oh, hey, I'm tired, I need to have a layout of what I did, or just try to get a list of anything you've done wrong or anything you try to go out and say to your employer. You don't have to bring up that, oh, I have dyspraxia, and try to explain everything to them. I know that's anxiety inducing. It's hell. It's why I've been trying to hide it forever. But the best thing to do is to just say, oh, hey, I'm having trouble grasping certain things. Can you just make a list real quick of just everything I need to get done every night or tonight or whatever? Get a basic briefing of what you have to do. Write it down. So that way, as you're doing things, you can check them off, and your short-term memory can't fuck up the writing. Another thing, before I end this video, I know it's been more of a tangent than an explanation per se. If you are interested in learning more about dyspraxia or DCD, or looking for more help, I'm planning on uploading more things to this channel, so you can subscribe, shameless plug. But there's also a lot of British YouTubers as well who do have dyspraxia. I mean, there's a really popular one. I can't remember her name right now, and I'm sorry. I'm going to leave a link in the description to your video. Maybe I'll put a little thing here too, just so you know I didn't forget about you. Well, I did, but that's just my short-term memory loss. I apologize. There's also a website that I'm linking in the description as well, so you can check out her YouTube channel, subscribe to my YouTube channel. I'm going to be uploading a couple more videos about dyspraxia, more in depth, how to roll cigarettes with dyspraxia. Not that you should smoke cigarettes, but if you are, you are. I'm sorry. Yeah, you guys have a good day.